the Italian polymath Vilfredo Federico Damaso Pareto, sociologist, economist, political scientist, and philosopher, was born in 1886. His contributions to economics include studying income distribution and analyzing individual choices. Among his other contributions was popularizing the term elite within a social analysis. In addition to introducing Pareto efficiency, he helped to develop the field of microeconomics. Moreover, he discovered that income follows a Pareto distribution, which is a power law probability distribution. According to his observations, about 20% of the Italian population owned 80% of all the wealth in the country, leading to the Pareto principle's name. Mathematical and sociological contributions were also made by him. In 1906, Pareto from Italy discovered a simple trick that influenced business science throughout the world. 80% of Italy's land was in the hands of 20% of the people, and 80% of the resources were ruled by 20% of the people. Therefore, Pareto used mathematical keys to add and subtract a rule, which later became the whole. Around the world, it is known as 80-20. The 80-20ths rule, simplified, is basically a law of cause and effect. In Pareto's view, the entire universe, including us, is governed by a mathematical distribution, and if we can learn these rules, the entire universe can change. There is an idea that 80% of the world's resources belong to about 20% of its citizens. With a few changes, it has proved to be correct. More than 80% of the world's resources are controlled by 20% of the world's population, according to a recent United Nations report. In the world of business, Pareto's hypothesis has been well researched and has yielded some very interesting results. Most companies report that 80% of their profits are owed to 20% of their customers. In other words, 80% of complaints come from 20% of pulses. 80% of production is the result of 20% of time being used correctly in a single day when it comes to time management. Today's resources have an ethical aspect. Usually, 80% of success depends on an individual team, and a company's performance is determined by 20% of its employees. Because of its mathematical convenience, Pareto's hypothesis has been extensively researched and used in the Western world in the past. 80% of accidents are caused by 20% of drivers, for instance. The habits and affairs of these 20% of drivers were studied, and rules were developed to prevent accidents. According to this method, 80% of crimes are committed by 20% of criminals, which means that these criminals are punished according to the laws related to them. School studies show that 20% of students are responsible for 80% of class performance. In addition, 20% of students will be the pride of the institute in the future. The 80-20 law was implemented on the social side of life and found that 80% of people keep in touch with their 20% friends. The average phone usage will show us that we spend 80% of our time with 20% of our contacts. Moreover, psychologists have also studied marriages and divorces and found that successful couples usually fulfill 80% of each other's needs. It is often the case that the 20% box is left empty, so we give more importance to this 20% part of a relationship that may be a danger. If you are still having trouble, pick up a calculator and start working. Each month, you will usually find that 20% of tasks consume 80% of your resources. Similarly, if you put your life statement in front of you, you will know that 80% of your life is due to 20% of your decisions. These 20% decisions can also be about gaining admission to a particular school or college, passing an exam, gaining a job, or building a relationship. Physicians also discovered that 80% of our illnesses are caused by 20% of our habits, which by correcting can solve many of our problems. Moreover, in a normal cricket match or a football match, 20% of the players perform at 80%. We maintain relationships with only 20% of our friends and relatives. The 80-20 law was also applied to politics. If we look at our political history, we will realize that 80% of problems are caused by 20% of the rulers in history. In the same way, we can easily find out which politicians are responsible for 80% of corruption. If you want, you can apply the 80-20 rule to every part of your life. Whether you are in business or studying, participating in a competition, or looking to strengthen a relationship, 80% of your results will come from 20% of your actions. Remember that every person achieves 20% of his life. In that individual's case, the remaining 80% of life proceeds smoothly. Finally, the last question you may want to ask yourself is whether you are prepared to catch your 20%.